Judge Dredd serves as one of the most striking examples of how a single person, wielding unchecked power, can impact a film. Naturally, we're talking about Sylvester Stallone, who, at the peak of his fame, signed on as the lead. Alongside Kevin Costner, Stallone was one of the biggest advocates for telling everyone around him how to properly make a film. Those who didn't follow his advice typically ended up regretting it. Judge Dredd became the last film in Stallone's career where the studio granted him absolute freedom. The initial script for Judge Dredd envisioned a very dark film about the future. Many who read the script compared it to Blade Runner. Arnold Schwarzenegger was initially set to star in Dredd during its early development stages. Peter Hewitt, who had gained recognition after Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, was appointed as the director. However, Schwarzenegger was in high demand at the time, and the Dredd script was not a priority for him. He was filming Last Action Hero and then wanted to work with James Cameron on True Lies. When it became clear that Arnold would not be involved, Peter Hewitt left the project, and that's when Danny Cannon signed on as the director. Hollywood studios had noticed Cannon after his indie film The Young Americans, with Harvey Keitel and Viggo Mortensen. The director received 2 simultaneous job offers. One was from 20th Century Fox, which wanted Cannon to direct Die Hard 3. At the time, John McTiernan, who eventually directed the third Die Hard, had initially turned down the role, and the studio was looking at young directors who could bring something new to the franchise. The second script that Cannon received was Judge Dredd. According to Danny Cannon, he almost immediately chose Dredd. The reason was that Die Hard 3 was a blockbuster with significant studio control, meaning the young director would have been very restricted on set. The situation with Dredd was somewhat different. After Arnold's departure, the film's budget was set to be around $50 million, which was substantial for the time, but far from $100 million for Die Hard. Therefore, Cannon expected less pressure from above. This might have been the case, but Sylvester Stallone emerged. In those years, Stallone constantly tried to take over projects from Schwarzenegger and was interested in anything Arnold was interested in. Sometimes this interest led to films like Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. In the 90s, it was believed that Stallone had snatched the role from under Schwarzenegger's nose. Later, Stallone admitted that after filming the comedy, he learned that Schwarzenegger had intentionally spread rumors about wanting to star in Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, thereby forcing him to go through a lot of people in Hollywood to get the script. Stallone now considers the film the worst in his career. Once Stallone joined the project, the budget for Judge Dredd doubled, making it indistinguishable from Die Hard 3 in terms of scale. Stallone immediately took to revising the Judge Dredd script, deleting or changing anything he deemed foolish. Sylvester Stallone is known for his obsessive desire to control the films he stars in. The term one-man band describes him well. Due to his star status, studios often turned a blind eye to most of his antics and decisions. It was Stallone who introduced the character, later played by Rob Schneider. Initially, Sly wanted Joe Pesci for the role, but after reading the script, Pesci declined. Stallone then remembered the quirky guy he had worked with in Demolition Man. Schneider did not refuse the offer. When filming started, things got even worse. Sly kept changing the existing script, which he had already influenced. According to the actor, he had never read comics in his life and wasn't going to start with Judge Dredd, so he had no idea what was important for the character and what wasn't. Everything was affected. The dark seriousness of the film disappeared. Danny Cannon constantly clashed with Stallone on set and requested to be fired, but due to contractual obligations and the requirements of the Directors Guild, the studio refused his request. In later interviews, Cannon would blame Stallone for all the problems of the film. He believes that Stallone turned a movie that resembled a mix of Ben-Hur and Blade Runner into a silly action comedy. In this, Danny Cannon was not far from the truth. Stallone himself mentioned in various interviews that he considered the original concept of the film a complete failure, and thus intentionally altered the script to include comedic elements. One of Stallone's ideas was to remove the helmet from the main character's head, for which he was later heavily criticized by professional critics and regular viewers. But his reasoning is understandable. What's the point of having Stallone in the lead role if he would be wearing a helmet the entire movie? Here, the studio is more to blame. It's also doubtful that Arnold, who was initially considered for Dredd, would have kept the helmet on throughout the film either. Composer David Arnold, who was supposed to write the music for Judge Dredd, was replaced by Alan Silvestri at Stallone's insistence. This decision was made because Arnold agreed with director Danny Cannon's vision and wanted to compose a very dark score for the film. The only contribution to the film that was not affected by Stallone's actions, according to director Danny Cannon, was the robot Hammerstein. Cannon insisted that the robot be made with hydraulics instead of using a costume similar to RoboCop's. Stallone agreed with this idea. When the filming process was completed and early footage reached the studio, the response was as expected. Test screenings went very poorly. Judge Dredd was quickly sent back for reshoots. Director Danny Cannon was removed from this work. Rumor has it that the reshoots were overseen by Sylvester Stallone himself. Cannon quarreled with the studio and was excluded from the final editing process. The director's career suffered significantly due to this situation with Dredd. A couple of years later, after making a small film Phoenix, Danny Cannon spent nearly a decade working in television and only returned to the big screen in 2005 with the film Goal. After its failure, Cannon did not work on big films again. Interestingly, the director seems to have kept his promise after filming Judge Dredd, never to work with big stars again. However, it is unknown whether he even had the opportunity. The reshoots without Danny Cannon couldn't fix the situation. Test screenings continued to perform poorly. Since the studio had no other options left, it ordered Stallone to reduce the film's rating from adult to PG-13. Despite the efforts of Harry Keramidas, Alex Mackey and Sylvester Stallone, they could not produce a PG-13 film. The film was reassembled several times, and the only version that the American Rating Commission agreed to give a PG-13 rating to, according to those who saw it, resembled an incoherent mess without any plot. Ultimately, the film was released in theaters with an R rating. Many analysts believe that the adult rating of the film led to its poor box office performance. Judge Dredd grossed $113 million against a budget of $90 million. The film caused a loss of about $100 million for Disney. If not for the great success of the movie The Rock, which the studio released immediately after Dredd, Disney would likely have closed its Hollywood Pictures division much earlier. As it was, the company was closed a few years later, after the high-profile failures of Deep Rising, Burn Hollywood Burn, Mystery Alaska, and Just Visiting, which occurred in the late 90s and early 2000s. It is generally believed that Judge Dredd marked the end of Sylvester Stallone's star career, and the failure of Assassins, which followed Dredd, only cemented this direction. Thank you for your attention.